Hello, my name is Aubrey. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I wanted to talk about why reading is so competitive. This is just a topic for a video that I've been chewing on for a while, and I thought that it would be a fun thing to discuss. So why is reading so competitive? Because I think we can all agree that it is competitive, like especially online, just there is a level of competition. And I wanted to talk about some of my own personal theories as to why I think it's like this as opposed to other like story-based hobbies. I want to talk about why I think that competitiveness is a good and a bad thing, maybe ultimately a bad thing. 3, how we can fix it, what we can do in the bookish community to lessen that feeling of competition. This video is not scripted, like I didn't write a script for this. I do have some notes that I'll be referring to, so I do apologize if this is kind of chaotic. But that's sort of how my brain works. I'm gonna do my best, and of course feel free to chime in the comments. Like, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Why is reading so competitive, and how did we get here? I feel like it is so interesting for a hobby that is so like solitary to be and feel so competitive online. In this video, I'm going to be comparing reading as a hobby to specifically video games, watching television, and watching movies, because those are the 4 like main story-based hobbies I could think of. Like, I guess there are some more niche things like going to see live theater or listening to like story-based podcasts, but I'd say that these are like the 4 mainstream story-based hobbies. So the first thing that kind of jumps out to me about reading as opposed to those other hobbies is that reading is, one, not only incredibly niche, but it is probably the least accessible of those hobbies. And I'm of course talking about my own experience in the United States. I've never lived abroad. I don't know what it's like in other countries. I would say that television is probably the most accessible form of storytelling, followed closely by movies, which you can of course watch on television some of the time if they're airing on certain channels. And then I'd say video games maybe comes after that. But reading as a hobby has a very specific barrier to entry, which is of course literacy, actually being able to read. So some statistics that I found online: 21% of adults in the United States are illiterate as of 2022. That is much higher than I would have thought. 21% of adults are illiterate, and 54% of adults have literacy below the 6th grade level. 54%! If that doesn't make you nauseous, like I don't know what will. 54% of adults have literacy below a 6th grade level. And only 34% of adults with low literacy proficiency weren't born in the United States. So, you might think like, oh, well, the, large percentage of adults in the US who are illiterate like don't speak English, or they're not native English speakers, but that's only 34%. So that's pretty crazy, right? That's pretty crazy. That means that 54% of adults in the United States cannot read at the level that we are reading here on BookTube and BookTok and those types of places, like YA and higher. Nearly half of the population of adults can't read. It's inaccessible to them. And so not only do you need a certain level of reading proficiency in order to access this hobby, you would also need access to books. You would need access to a library and a mode of transportation to get to that library, or you would of course need money in order to purchase books. And then the third thing we all need to participate in reading as a hobby that I don't think we really think about is a certain level of like prolonged attention. You literally cannot mindlessly read a book, right? Like, you can have a TV show on in the background and be completely tuned out, or a movie. You can be playing a video game and not really be paying attention to it. You literally can't mindlessly read a book. That's just not how it works. Like, you have to be in that state of flow where you're seeing like the images in your mind, like it's playing out like a movie. So with our ever increasing work hours and stress levels, just like distractions galore, I feel like the ability to sit down and do one thing for a long period of time is getting harder and harder. And so all of these factors, I think, make reading really inaccessible for most people. Not just anyone can pick up reading as a hobby. Okay, so that's like puzzle piece 1. Reading is a decently inaccessible hobby. But then on top of that, like I feel like the layering on the cake of that is that reading is seen as healthy. Like reading is seen as good for us, as opposed to watching television, movies, and playing video games, which there is science to back that up. Like there is science to suggest that reading is very good for us. But, you know, I think reading is like very romanticized in our culture, and it's romanticized by people outside of like bookish spaces. It's put on this pedestal of like a healthy, you know, like highbrow, smart person hobby. I think this is an especially key part in what makes reading so competitive. Because here's the thing, if you say to somebody, I watched 50 movies last year, crickets, right? If you say, I played 50 video games last year, nobody cares. Other video game nerds might care or might be impressed by that number, but like people who don't play video games are not going to care about that. And more than that, they might look down on you for that, right? They might kind of wrinkle their nose and be like, maybe you should go outside and touch some grass. It's not good for you to play that many video games. It's not good for you to like watch that many movies or that many TV shows. But if you say, I read 50 books last year, people are clapping. Right? People are clapping. People are impressed with you. And not just bookish people, right? Like most people are impressed by that number, 50 books. Wow. And that right there, that has sunk into all of our brains and ruined us. I fully believe that, because here's the kicker. The line between books read and applause just like go up at the same rate. Reading 50 books is impressive. Reading 100 books is more impressive. Reading 150 is even more, and 200 and 300, and it just goes up and up. The more you read, the more people clap. You say to somebody, I read 200 books last year, and they're floored, right? It's like a magic trick. Like, how did you do that? Tell me your secrets. It's impressive. And so we're all scrambling up that ladder, trying to either be the most impressive person in the room by reading the most amount of books, or we're trying to just not be left behind, right? We're trying to just read an appropriate amount of books, whatever number of books feels like we can still call ourselves a reader, like we want to belong. This is my theory. This is what I think. I think that because reading is seen as healthy, because it's put on this pedestal, because we get more applause the more we read, this is why it's so competitive. Is competitive reading a bad thing? Unfortunately, I don't think this is super black and white. Like, I think there are pros and cons. So I would say that competitive reading really began and like started to get toxic with the Goodreads challenge, which was first introduced in 2011, where of course you can set your own yearly goal for how many books you want to read, and you can see all of your friends' goals and how many books they want to read, and you can see how many books they've read and how quickly they're getting to their goal. And every time you log into Goodreads, it will let you know like what percentage along you are in your goal. Like, oh, you're 2 books ahead, you're 2 books behind. And so for some people, I think this really works. Like a certain amount of, you know, challenge and competition and social accountability really does cause people to read more. In my own experience, like joining Goodreads caused my reading to go up pretty dramatically. So my first ever reading challenge was in 2015. I read 13 books. And I know for a fact that like before that, I was probably reading like 1 to 5 books, you know, for pleasure, not for school or anything like that. 2016, I read 37 books. 2017, I read 41 books. 2018, I read 21 books. And 2019, I read 25 books. And then in 2020, I joined BookTube. I joined BookTube in October of 2020, and my reading bumped up again significantly. So in 2020, I read 34 books. In 2021, I read 66 books. 2022, I read 68 books. And 2023, last year, I read 81 books. Even in my own experience, just having a Goodreads account and having those challenges, like, bumped up my reading quite a lot, and then literally joining a bookish space, a bookish community, bumped my reading way up again. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons why I started this channel in the first place is because I knew that it would encourage me to read more. Like, I knew if I had a platform, if I had people to talk to, if I felt a certain pressure to create content, I would read more. And I have, and I do, and I'm actually really happy with that result. So I looked up some more statistics. This was a survey that I guess was done last year. The average number of fully finished books within a 12-month period for American adults was 5 books, but when it's broken down by generation, it's like very disheartening. So the average number of books finished by boomers was 9.54. The number of books finished by Gen X was 6.01. The number of books finished by millennials was 4.38. And the number of books finished by Gen Z was 3.52. We are trending downwards by generation pretty significantly, which is scary and sad and disheartening. We need to get people reading. Like, I genuinely feel very strongly about this. Reading is good for us. You know, not only does reading increase literacy, there's evidence to show that it increases critical thinking skills and empathy and emotional intelligence and being able to problem solve. Reading is a really important skill, and it's also an important hobby that I think all or most Americans should have to some degree. Is that a hot take? I don't know. That's just how I feel. So, you know, one might argue that anything that gets people reading and gets people reading more, such as a little bit of healthy competition, is a good thing, right? Like the Goodreads challenge, if it gets people to read more, is a good thing. My problem with the Goodreads challenge and where I think we are as a reading community in general is the emphasis on numbers. And I think that a reading culture that cares more about numbers than it does about quality, comprehension, satisfaction, like, that's not great. Your Goodreads goal doesn't care if you enjoy any of the books that you read. It doesn't care if you remember them. It doesn't care if they were any good. Just how many did you read? How many did you read? Did you hit your goal? Did you exceed it? Did you read more than your friends? Did you read more than you did last year? And like, I don't think it's super healthy to just consume. It's not conducive to thinking critically about the things that we've read. It doesn't feel like we're supposed to linger and ponder on the things that we're reading. We're supposed to be gorging ourselves, right? Like, don't savor, swallow it whole. There are so many videos here on YouTube about how to read more, and significantly fewer videos on how to read more critically, right? How to go deeper with a piece of literature. And my guess is that that's because people are more concerned with reading more, because the more you read, the more applause you get. Nobody's checking to see how well you engaged with the thing that you read, just whether or not you finished it, right? Like, the dopamine hit comes from being able to check it off of your Goodreads challenge. 60 down, 10 more to go. So I think our competitiveness and our obsession with numbers is not only like flattening our reading experiences and just sort of like making it so that you've just always got to be reading. You finish one book, no time to think about it, just start the next one. But I also think that the more competitive something is, the more toxic it can be. There's an insane amount of toxicity and gatekeeping in the bookish community, right? Like, we've all experience that. Certain genres are worthier than others. We all need to be reading more classics. Fiction is a waste of time. We should all be reading nonfiction. Read diversely, but don't read YA because that's garbage. If you haven't read X, Y, or Z series, then you're not a real fan of X, Y, or Z genre. Audiobooks don't count. Manga doesn't count. You have to read X number of books to be a real reader. If you're not reading every day, you're not a real reader. If you can't remember every detail of a book, then you didn't really read it, and on and on and on. And so if the people at the very top who are reading the most amount of books and reading the right types of books are getting the most applause and attention, then that just cultivates a real level of like resentment and toxicity. We want to tear down what other people are reading or how they're reading it to make ourselves feel better. If you're someone who read 200 books last year, but you're standing next to somebody who read 300 books last year, your number is less impressive. That person with 300 books is getting more applause than you. And I think this is why we're all so feral online about this stuff, and why there are still so many people who want to die on the hill of like audiobooks don't count, or, you know, manga and graphic novels shouldn't count towards your Goodreads goal. Because in a reading culture that only cares about numbers, somebody who listens to audiobooks has an unfair advantage over people who don't. You simply cannot compete with someone who can listen to an audiobook on their commute or while they're doing chores. So I think ultimately it is a bad thing. Like, I do think that reading being a competition, the emphasis on reading being so much about the numbers, like, I think this is a bad thing. But what can we do? All right, so I don't think that doing away with Goodreads challenges or those types of metrics is necessarily the answer. Like I said, like, my reading did really increase with those Goodreads challenges. Plus, I really love being able to look back every year that I've had one and see which books I've read and just have that little like time capsule record. So I don't think that like Goodreads challenges should go away necessarily. Though I will say, pro tip, if you're anything like me, the past 2 years I have set my goal to 1 book because I just want to keep track of my reading. I don't want my reading to feel like homework. I personally absolutely hate when Goodreads tells you like if you're behind or ahead in your Goodreads goal. Like, I don't want to know that information. It gives me so much anxiety either way. If I'm behind, then I'm automatically discouraged. But if I'm ahead, I'm a little bit anxious because I want to stay ahead, right? It's just not something that psychologically benefits me. I set my goal to 1 book. I read whatever books I read, and that's just that. So that could be a solution. Something that I do wish was possible is that I really wish that our Goodreads challenges could be private. I don't think this is a feature. Like, I looked and I couldn't find a way to make it private. And I think this would especially be helpful for people who are maybe, I don't know, embarrassed by their Goodreads challenge goal. Like, if you feel like your goal is too low, you know, compared to your friends or compared to what other people are reading. Like, I wish there was a way to set it to private so that you could just have your own personal little challenge. It wasn't public, because not reaching your Goodreads goal shouldn't be a big deal. Like, that should not be an earth-shattering thing. But the fact that it's public and that if you don't reach your goal, you are publicly failing in front of your friends and your followers, like, that can add a certain level of pressure, and it might feel a lot worse than I think it should, right? Not meeting your Goodreads goal is not the end of the world, and it shouldn't feel like the end of the world. So I think being able to privatize our own goals should be an option. I also wish there were other ways to challenge yourself besides the number Goodreads goal. Like, if you want to challenge yourself to a certain number of books, that's fine, but I don't think that should have to be everyone's goal. I would love more options, right? Like, I want to read 10 5-star books this year, or I want to read a certain number of books by diverse authors, or I want to read a certain number of pages this year, or I want to read a certain number of books in a certain genre that's outside of my comfort zone, right? Like, I think being able to personalize our own reading goals and not just having this one universal measure on like what a good reading year was would also be very helpful. All right, and then to those of us who are booktubers or book talkers or book influencers of any kind, we need to stop apologizing when we don't read enough. I only read 4 books in February, and I had to fight the urge so hard to apologize. It didn't feel like enough. And so we absolutely need to delete, oh, I only read blank from our collective consciousness, like, altogether. Let it die. Do not apologize for reading whatever you consider to be an unworthy amount of books. Do not apologize for getting into reading slumps. Do not apologize for your reading taste, your reading habits, or anything else. The standard for how much we should be reading and how we should be feeling about ourselves based on our reading, like, lives and dies with us, right? You know, if we're the influencers, then we're the ones primarily creating and perpetuating these standards. So, you know, cut it out. Taylor from Made Between the Pages very recently did a 1-book wrap up and I love it. I love it. Please, let's normalize small wrap-ups. Normalize inconsistent reading, right? Like, we cannot always be reading at high volumes all the time. Like, that's crazy. And collectively, as readers, you, me, everybody, we need to make a conscious effort to stop caring so much about numbers. We need to stop celebrating people who read insane amounts of books. And while yes, that is an accomplishment and you're allowed to feel proud of yourself for reading a lot of books, like, you're not a worthier reader than someone who reads fewer books. And besides which, reading lots of books shouldn't be the goal. It can be a goal. Like I said, I'm very happy with like my increase in reading, but you know, it's not the goal. The goal is to enjoy our hobby. Picking up books that we want to read and then reading them at our own pace. I don't want to look back at 2023 and think, oh yeah, that was the year that I read 81 books. I want to look back and think, that's the year that I read The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi for the first time. That was the year I went on a seafaring adventure with a girl who loves teacups and fought in a gang war on the streets of Janloon. I want to remember the books I read and loved, right? Like, that's what it's about. I just really don't think anything else should matter. So anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Please let me know your guys' thoughts on this because I'm so excited to discuss this with you in the comment section. So I'll see you down there. Please like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more from me. I hope to see you next time. Bye.